Welcome to the recording of the webinar, Establishing and Managing an Effective Transfrontier Conservation Area Network.
These TFCAs are at different stage of advancement, and they are also categorized, depends on the stage where they are. So we have the first one where we are looking at, we actually call them in three categories. The categories Category A consists of TFCAs which are already established, and they have formal legal instruments, either treaties or memorandum of agreement, which are mutually binding to the member states. And out of that, we have 8. We also have Category B, emerging conservancies. Of course, these are TFCA, which have some form of maybe memorandum of understanding, and which facilitate member state to then move to Category A. And then we have TFCAs which are on the conceptual level, which is Category C. We have 6 TFCA there. These are basically at the conceptual stage, and they are still busy and figuring out, and eventually can then move to Category B. What is important and what we have learned from the different categories in terms of member state is that there are countries which have TFCAs which are in Category A. And we have some of them, same member states, which are maybe in Category B or C, but the lesson we have learned is that there is always a willingness to exchange information, to even help those TFCA in categories B or C to move to the other categories. So it's really learning between different categories of the TFCA to ensure that the others also become established. I just want to address how the TFCA network began. It began in 2013, September. There was an inception meeting in Johannesburg in the Republic of South Africa, whereby the 9 SADC member states attended. You may want to check the picture down there. It's some of the member states and other stakeholders who attended. And from that meeting, the network was formed. This, as I said, I was speaking to component 4 of the key areas, and it was really to respond to the SADC TFCA program on establishment of data and knowledge management system. And again, it's looking at 2 issues: establishment of platform forms for knowledge management and exchanging of information, and of course, critically, we need to look at, hearing the echo, we need to be able to measure the impact. So the other area is really to establish the monitoring and evaluation framework for the SADC TFCA. I would like to speak to why the network was the purpose, why the network was established. As I said, it's really around knowledge management, but we looked at there has been a number of challenges at TFCAs, and we thought to overcome some of these challenges, there's a need for us to learn through sharing lessons. We need to manage the knowledge and also ensure collaboration between member states. Who is open to join this network? The network is quite open to all the stakeholder groups and individuals. We have stakeholders ranging from member states, parastatals, we have NGO, we have international cooperative partners, we have academias, we have even communities. So it's really open. Critical to point out is that this network is guided or led by a steering committee. This steering committees consist of the TFCA focal points from all the SADC member states and also the SADC Secretariat. And they then play the role of steering and ensure that the actions and decision of the network is taken to the level at SADC level. The chairing of the steering committee is really following our SADC procedures, whereby it's done on a rotational basis as per SADC Troika. And currently the SADC chair is Tanzania. So even at the network level, Tanzania is the one chairing. I hope the chair is part of this meeting. Just to move on, I was talking about information sharing, knowledge management, and collaboration. So we have around 4 practice, whereby the first one is information exchange. We are looking at really sharing experience within TFCA, but also across TFCA, as I indicated earlier, that we have different categories of TFCA. Hence, there is a lot of sharing in terms of experience, but also assisting other TFCA to make sure that they are established, or we assist each other in the implementation of different plans. We also do field visits, of course, to enhance the understanding and just understand what people are doing in terms of the local context. There is a lot of joint learning and knowledge management. The network have an online portal, which is a platform for joint learning, which is also not only open to the network members, but it's also open to the outsiders. And we are using this to develop a regional repository for TFCA related information, and also to ensure that we package and have documentation which is accessible to everyone. Resource mobilization through the TFCA network, through awareness, through our involvement, we have done a lot of resource mobilization, either to specific TFCA or to the entire network or the entire TFCA in Southern Africa. Again, very important is really to the practice to strengthen collaboration in the relationship. We have been having on an annual basis, having face-to-face meeting at the network level, and then making sure also that the steering committee look at the recommendation, if there is anything to take up to the member states through the technical committee to the ministerial, then decisions are made at that level. Sure what is happening. I indicated earlier that our network is open to different stakeholders. This graph is really just to show how the network has been growing over the year. We have two groups. We have the, as I refer to, the portal, and we have a membership there. And if you check this network, the portal was developed in April 2014 with 32 members. And as we speak, the status in April, we now have over 370 members. We have a very active WhatsApp group, which was started sometimes in August 2016. And these have also been growing, and there's so many people from different expertise who joined this group. Very active. We share a lot of information, and I have seen, especially the past 3 months, the information which were shared, even opportunities with regards to leveraging funds, but also packages to assist TFCAs and members with regards to COVID-19. But I mean, there have been this active WhatsApp group. This pie chart is just showing the different stakeholder group which are participating in the network. It's largely dominated by government and prosecutors, which is making about 35%, followed by the NGOs, 21%. And then we also have a large number of international cooperative partners. And just to note that the communities make a small proportion of the participation, and it's really for us as the SADC TFCA network we are working on ensuring that we have more community participation, but we also take note that most of the community also do not have access to information and technology, and it's a role which member states also play in terms of making sure that they take information from the community to the network. So we, as member states, we also play that role as voice for the community, but it's really our desire that they participate in this network, the communities together with their traditional authorities. Just to zoom into the network activities, I mentioned earlier that we have face-to-face meetings. I've mentioned the communication platform through the portal. You may want to, for those who are not aware, you can find us online. Of course, the WhatsApp group I just alluded to. We also have established a regional community of practice. This is like specialized community of practice. We have one on monitoring and evaluation. We have one on data management, tourism, training, and capacity building. And because there have been a lot of work and a lot of project on law enforcement, and also because our protocol is on law enforcement and anti-poaching, there have been a proposal that we introduce the community engagement in law enforcement and anti-poaching community of practice, and we are hoping that this will be established in this 2020. Resource mobilization, I've spoke to that. There have been a lot of funding which we mobilized through the TFCA network. But very, very important to mention is that we have successfully set up what we call the SADC TFCA financing facility, which with the support of the BMC, the Federal Ministry for Economic for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, together with the KfW development funding. They assisted us with the initial seed funding, but we are really envisioning that it will become a multi-donor trust fund. We are also supporting the SADC processes. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of discussion at the network, annual network meetings. There's a lot of recommendation coming out of those meetings. So the role of the network through the steering committee is really to table the recommendations to the technical committee meetings of SADC and ministerial meeting. And we have seen a very critical decision taken at SADC ministerial level as a result of the engagement of the network. We are also facilitating that member states, we have stakeholders which are in our countries and sometimes they do not attend this meeting. So we are really using this platform to make sure that we have information, we have feedback from the stakeholder in the TFCA network, and also vice versa. Not only information to feed into, but also to take information to them. Moving toward the conclusion, just continuing with other network activities. Through the network, the SADC TFCA network, we have participated and we have seen the development of key regional guidelines, which are very, very critical in the development and management of TFCA. We have one on establishment and development of TFCA. We also have another one on tourism concession guideline. We have also developed a guideline on community engagement. And we also now have monitoring and evaluation framework where we are measure and trying to document impacts of TFCA in SADC, and then cross-border tourism products guideline. These guidelines are very important to us as member states, especially for upcoming TFCAs. They are looking at doing different components, implementing different activities. You just take this document, but they are also open to the East Africa communities and to the world as well. So it's really about sharing and making sure that what we have learned through our engagement is also making a difference to others. We have participated in global events. In 2014, we participated in the IUCN World Park Congress in Sydney, Australia. If you look at the theme for that Congress was on parks, people, and planet. And if we look at the TFCA, we are really looking at meeting people, encountering wildlife, and cross borders. So you can see that there is a relationship between some of this. We have also attended the COP17 on international trade on in endangered species, which was in South Africa. Luckily, it was also in SADC, so we really participated in that. We also participated in the in COP14 for CBD in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, 2018, whereby the network shared their stories and how they are contributing to conservation of biodiversity. And also just try to inform decisions and contribute to the decision made at different platforms. Just to conclude, is to really say that through the network, we have been learning a lot from each other. There are so many people like me, I'm not quite old to the network, but through this network, we have learned so much. As member state, we keep in touch on the daily basis, and it's just very important to know, even if you are somewhere in Iona Skeleton Coast or in the Kaza area somewhere and you are stuck, you know you have a friend somewhere in the old TFCA, and they are always willing to advise you on whatever decision you have to make. With those remarks, thank you very much. Asante sana.
Thank you so much, Namba, for that really inspiring presentation. That was truly an excellent overview, and you've given us a really nice taste of the strengths of the network that you have created. Thank you very much. To everyone listening, if you have questions for the speakers, please put your questions into the chat box, and we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can during the question and answer sessions that we will be moderating throughout the morning. Now we will try to circle back to Director Gove to see if he is able to make his statements before we move on to the next two presentations. Director, the floor is yours if you're able.
Here. And I pray our communication continues smooth. Let me welcome you all to this meeting. And we pray that it will continue like that. And thank you for your commitment for a common cause of safeguarding our African heritage. I would also like to express our appreciation to the organizers, presenters, and hosts of this meeting, in particular the East African community, the SADC TFCA members, and our partners, CMS, IUCN, and GIZ for the continued support. The SADC region has a number of large transboundary ecosystems of global significance for biological diversity, but also 50% of our GDP is primarily from agriculture, mining, forestry, tourism, and wildlife sectors. In addition to that, about 75%. Hello? Hello?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. 75% of rural communities directly depend on these natural resources for their livelihoods. And over the years, SADC has realized that successful conservation, sustainable use of the region's biological resources depends on transboundary cooperation, which should also be supported at a very high political level. So we should have a high level political commitment. And of course, for SADC, this is through the SADC Treaty Vision. We do recognize that the international boundaries were set without taking into consideration the ecosystem boundaries, and this is the reality in Africa. One of the consequences dissecting natural ecosystems, which result into unsustainable components, which restricts the species dispersal and interaction. And therefore, this compromise the well-being and resilience of ecosystems. In an attempt to address these challenges, countries in Southern Africa have been establishing transfrontier conservation areas, and I think the first speaker spoke about this. So we may be having some repetition here, but it's better than gaps. A TFCA is defined as an area or component of a large ecological region that straddles the boundaries of 2 or more countries. So 2 countries can have a TFCA, more than 2 countries can have the same TFCA. We have the example of Kavango and Zambezi, where we have 5 different countries in one TFCA. The objectives of TFCAs are 1, to foster transnational collaboration and cooperation between the parties in order to facilitate effective management of transboundary ecosystems. So we have to take into account the specificity of that ecosystem that we are protecting that cut across different countries. It's also to enhance ecosystem integrity and natural ecological processes by harmonizing land use management practice across international boundaries. So we are breaking the boundaries, artificial boundaries, and recognizing the natural boundaries. Promote socioeconomic development through sustainable use of natural resources and cross-border tourism, and deepening regional integration and cooperation. The genesis of TFCA development in SADC region, as the first speaker, my peer from Namibia, has indicated, can be traced back to the signing of the international treaty between Botswana and South Africa in 1999 that led to the establishment of Galagadi Transfrontier Park. And this was officially launched in 12 May 2000 to become the first TFCA that have been formally established in Southern Africa. And as she has indicated, currently there are 18 TFCAs across the SADC region that are in different stages of developments. And this is the biggest number in the world. So we are proud of that. The network of TFCAs in SADC region covers an area of 500,000 square kilometers and represents not only some of the most important ecosystems like we know East Africa also has, but also some of the best tourism destination, as it is the case of East Africa also. In fact, this year we are commemorating the 20th years or anniversary of transfrontier conservation in Southern Africa. The legal foundation for the establishment, development, and management of TFCAs is the SADC Protocol on Wildlife Conservation and Law Enforcement, which calls for member states to promote the conservation of shared wildlife resources through the establishment of TFCAs. So it is in our legal binding document, the Protocol on Wildlife. However, given the cross-cutting nature of TFCAs, the agreements are also informed by other protocols, like the Protocol on Forestry, on shared water courses, on fisheries, on development of tourism, and the Protocol on free movement of persons, which calls for liberalization of visa regimes, among others, because in TFCAs we have tourism, as I had indicated earlier. The multilateral environmental agreements that we are addressing by establishing a TFCA include the CBD, as everyone knows, CITES, the UN AFCCC, and UNESCO World Heritage Convention, among others. Taking into account the fact that the TFCAs movement was gaining momentum, as well as challenges that we were facing, a SADC TFCA program was developed and approved in 2013 to be able to provide a framework to guide and coordinate the TFCA development process in the region, as well as mobilize financial and technical resources that are really key to move with this process. So this program, the TFCA program that was approved in 2013, has 7 key component areas. Component 1 is advocacy and harmonization. It's really very key. Component 2 is enhancement of financing mechanisms for TFCAs. In this component, we are currently finalizing the establishment of the SADC TFCA financing facility to be able to fund the relevant TFCAs in the region through ICP resources, but also member states as we go along. And the German is really very instrumental in this process. The component 3 is capacity building of TFCA stakeholders, including managers and arrangers. Component 4 is establishment of data and knowledge management systems. And here the TFCA network is really very key because they are the brains that support all our process within the TFCAs. Component 5, enhancement of local livelihoods. 6, reducing vulnerability of ecosystems and people to the effect of climate change. And component 7, development of TFCAs into marketable regional tourism products. And we do have an organization that we call Boundless Southern Africa that is actively coordinating this process of promoting TFCAs as a good tourism destination within the region. And all these actions under the TFCA program are aligned with the SADC Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, which is the tool that we use to implement the SADC Treaty. We have had the first RSDP, the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, from 2003 until this year, 2020. We are now finalizing the other RSDP from 2020 to 2030 that will be approved in August this year in Maputo, whether physically or virtually. And the TFCA program is fully aligned with that Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan. So it is one of key strategies to support both RSDP and the SADC protocol on wildlife conservation and law enforcement. In order to overcome the challenges associated with these ambitions in conservation, again, the SADC member states agreed in 2013 to set up an organized forum of practitioners and stakeholders, the SADC TFCA network. The early intervention was introducing, but I'm sure that my colleagues, Tawanda, Clara, Nambo, Lisa, and Steve will provide more details. And based off that, we can exchange our experience. And hopefully, I pray that we continue with this cross-fertilization in terms of experience. It's not just one way, it should be all the directions. The TFCA network is expected and is doing that to support SADC to overcome the challenges through shared learning, knowledge management, and collaboration. And since 2013, the network has grown, as the earlier speaker has said, from strength to strength, and several milestones have been achieved with the immense contribution of the network, such as development of guidelines. So everything that we're doing in SADC in the area of wildlife and TFCAs, we use the TFCA network as our forum, technical forum, to provide all the inputs. And of course, we take all their inputs to the political level through the different committees up to the ministers, Council of Ministers, but the TFCA is our think tank and provides all these inputs to our process. So we are really indebted to these collective efforts of all the stakeholders through collaboration and partnership. So I'm just repeating the activity of SADC TFCA network have largely been supported by the government of Federal Republic of Germany through the German International Technical Cooperation, GIZ, in collaboration with SADC Secretariat. Other organizations also are providing their support to the SADC TFCA network. We include IUCN, USAID, the Peace Pact Foundation, WWF, and the member states, which continue to host, guide, and facilitate the activities of the network. And going forward, the TFCAs network is expected to continue supporting the alignment of the SADC TFCA programs with priorities of SADC as outlined under the RSDP, the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, and the Regional Agriculture Policy, because wildlife is within the Regional Agriculture Policy. So the network is also expected to provide advice on long-term sustainability of the programs, including institutional arrangement and financing mechanisms. Again, I would like to share our happiness for the establishment of TFCA financing facility that will be really very instrumental to take our agenda forward. We strongly believe that this dialogue that we are starting today will further enhance sharing of knowledge and experience, because that is the basis for everything that we are doing. We have to do things in an informed way. And I think sharing of knowledge and experience is really key. And this will facilitate upscaling of best practice for effective natural resource conservation and management over the extended geographical landscape across our two regions. Myself, I'm coming from the marine side, and I've been working for some years based in Tanzania, and I've been interacting with the East African community. So I went several times to Arusha, and one of the aspects that we've been working there, and is also part of the TFCAs, is the Northern Mozambique Channel TFCA area, which is in process of being established. And there, as you know, I mean, there are no boundaries. So we're talking about exactly the same coastal and marine resources that cut across the SADC region and East African region, and we're including one of the most commercial fisheries, the tuna fisheries. So I think we are together. There are no boundaries among us. And in African style, we have to sit down together and telling our stories. And based on that, we'll grow together. Thank you very much. Asanteni sana for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, for that really exciting insight into how this network is working, and also the real collaboration that you have across your region on these transboundary conservation efforts. It was a very inspiring presentation and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now move forward on the agenda to our second presentation by Clara on the SADC TFC network and how it is governed and coordinated. And please remember, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to put them in the comments box and we will address them later. Thank you very much, and over to you, Clara.
Thank you, Andrea. Can everybody see my screen? Just double checking.
We can, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Andrea and Leo for the opportunity to join in this presentation, and of course to my colleague from the network. What I would like to do is, you've heard a lot about the network already, so just delve a little bit deeper into the functioning of the network and how we have organized it to make sure that it has both a role of facilitation but also an official role within the SADC structures. So the role of the network is essentially twofold, and you've heard this already. On the one hand is to facilitate the shared learning and the exchange of information, but also to enhance the collaboration between member states and between TFCAs. So also in terms of sharing experiences. And then also to become a sort of platform or entity where this sharing of information can be externalized as well, so that we don't just talk to each other, but we learn from others and we help others learn from our experiences. And this kind of interaction is one such example in which to have a strong network as we have is helping us to collect our ideas and then be able to share them with others. So the organizational structure is mimicking that of the SADC. The Southern Africa Development Community is a community of member states. So there is a secretariat structure, which is sort of looking at the sectoral issues that pertain to the management of the region as per the member states. And each member state is elected, as Nambo explained a little bit earlier, to chair a specific semester. And then within that structure of the chair, we have a larger structure, which is what we call that of the Troika, where you have the current chair, the past chair, and the immediately future chair coming in together to organize decision making. So we mimic that format, and we have the SADC TFCA unit forming a secretariat. So in this current phase, it's Deborah and Tawanda both attending this seminar. And then we have the representative of the three chairs, so the current, the past, and the future. And then we have the steering committee members. Now, the steering committee members are not just the nominated representative of each member state to participate in the network, but also the representatives of the TFCAs that have an institutional arrangement, which is not simply a rotational coordination by the different countries. So for instance, we have here represented in our group Frederick Lipozzo from CASA, and CASA is one such TFCAs that has an established secretariat. So the head of the secretariat or whoever he mandates becomes a member of the steering committee and then participates in the meeting and decision making. Similarly, for the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area, or for the Maloti-Drakensberg Transfrontier Conservation Areas, where we have established secretariat or international coordinator. So this is also effectively in recognition of the fact that TFCAs are, yes, a multilateral effort in ecosystem management, but they present with their own issues and complexities. And therefore, as we manage the ecosystem as individual countries, we mustn't forget the component of togetherness and how do we work together. So this is why they're represented in the steering committee. The role of the steering committee, again, is essentially twofold. On the one hand, of course, they support the management of the network. So effectively, they consider the request for the memberships by non-member state partners. They consider also calls for membership revocation and see if there is a situation thereof. They facilitate in amicable dispute resolution amongst members, which has never happened, but in case we have a provision for that. And they also contribute into the network meeting. They support the organization, the facilitation, they're active participants, and they are also mandated to organize and manage other sort of substructures as they're relevant. What does it mean? It means that when the network was established, while it was recognized that there was a very strong need for plenary engagement, amongst the steering committee members, but also between the steering committees and partners or other experts in the sector, as the theme of the network would require on a yearly basis. There would have been some topics that required either special investigation or further sort of micro-level working groups. And in order to look at that, I would refer you back to the components of the TFCA program, which you have heard before, both from the director and from Nambo. So in that respect, what has happened is that we have created, for instance, communities of practice in 2016, because at that time, the network members and the steering committee agreed that there were specific issues that required a closed up working group, like, for instance, the component on marketing TFCAs as a united and harmonized tourism product for the region. But also require further investigation, like how do we look at capacity building and training on TFCAs without knowing what is the offer already existing in our region, for instance. And then there is the four components under which the network was established, which is also including monitoring, evaluation, and data management. And so two subgroups were created, one looking at developing the monitoring and evaluation framework for the SADC TFCA program, and then looking at data management beyond what had already been done with the portal. And then more recently, it seemed that the members of the working groups on the monitoring evaluation and on the data management were pretty much already working together on similar issues within their own programs or institutions. And also, we also realized that, monitoring evaluation is important for internal reporting, but that internal reporting will also need to be somewhat translated into an auto document that would allow people to see what has been happening in transfrontier conservation in Southern Africa and sort of identify areas of success, and then maybe identify areas in which more support would be needed and provide that kind of support. And for that, we required more of a data management component. And how do we translate data into information for outside? So in that respect, we then brought them together, and we now have a coalescing community of practice on both data management and monitoring evaluation. So effectively now we have 3 community of practices that are working, and the community of practices are entirely on a volunteer basis. So they come up out of discussions, and when people show some interest and they decide to create a group together. But then what is required is always the participation of a member of a steering committee, especially from the member states, just to make sure that whenever there are meetings and whatever decisions are made for the COP or activities are planned, there is that exchange of information between the COP and the rest of the steering committee to ensure endorsement and validation of the activities, and if necessary and possible, even other external support so that the activities can carry on. So this is very important in order to maintain also the understanding that even though as volunteers within this process we seek independence and we seek to bring forward our own ideas and expertise in a sort of free environment, we also working within the construct of the SADC TFCA network and steering committee, which responds to specific SADC guidelines on what is transfrontier conservation and what are the priorities for transfrontier conservation in our region. So, carrying on the organizational structure, I would like to spend I would like to spend a couple of words on the role of the Secretariat. And again, this goes back to the way SADC as an organization is structured. SADC is a coming together of member states who ultimately are responsible for making the decisions at different levels. And within this context, the Secretariat, much like the SADC Secretariat, has more of a coordinating support and facilitation support, and also providing the link between what happens between the SADC TFCA Steering Committee and Network and the SADC Secretariat and the SADC structures per se. So there are 2 different types of involvement and role dedicated to the Secretariat, and one is that of, so we can call it regional harmonization. So ensuring that the activities that are conducted with and by the network are aligned to SADC vision and strategies and instruments, but also support from a regional and integrated perspective, synergies with other programs within SADC and with other international coordinating partners. So making sure that, for instance, we don't work in sectors, and we don't sort of work as in TFCAs as just a sort of standalone sector, but we sort of look out at other areas that are of relevance for the successful implementation of transfrontier conservation. And then looking at establishing and applying rules of ownership and copyright of information for all the knowledge products that are coming out of the SADC TFCA network. So just sort of make sure that what comes out is vetted and verified and also is recognizable as such. So it's a SADC TFCA document. And then promoting awareness about the SADC TFCA network. Again, this is the idea of having the Secretariat as the support system that really becomes the glue of the system, and make sure that things are done together and then externalized together, and hence the SADC TFCA program. More directly, they do support the network by facilitating technical and financial assistance to the activities undertaken under the network, by providing Secretariat facilitation and moderation services as required by the network and the steering committee, and by conducting quality assurance of activities, services, and products of the SADC TFCA network. So that means also getting involved with the activities that are conducted, including, for instance, the community of practices, to make sure that there is that link maintained between SADC priorities, which are determined by the member states, and the work of the network and its bodies. And finally, we come to the membership. You've already been told by my colleagues that more or less the criteria for membership are essentially that of being a sort of practitioner in TFCAs, or definitely an interested person in furthering the implementation and management, sustainable implementation and management of transfrontier conservation areas. And so we're looking at civil society and academia. We're looking at NGOs, including international NGOs, international cooperating partners, and the private sector. And bear in mind that, you know, within the membership, all of these 4 categories have sort of different roles as well, and they self-appoint to this kind of interactions. So the international cooperating parties will be strictly more working with either the TFCA as such or the SADC Secretariat to make sure that they have an outlet for communication and facilitation of implementing their activities. Similarly with the private sector, specifically with the tourism sector, whereas civil society, academia, NGOs have more of a fluid kind of interaction that is supporting information production, information sharing, and helping, contributing in any way to the reporting back on the activities of the TFCAs to the steering committee and then the SADC Secretariat and the member states. So in terms of criteria, if we really want to delve deeper into the issue, who can become a member? Well, the documents that was approved on the network specifically says that is any individual, organization or institution with an expressed interest or demonstrable experience in TFCA development. And then it can also, so they can request through the portal to become an official member and therefore have a login access to the portal that my colleague Nambo showed to you earlier, or they can be recommended by another member of the network to join the group. So the idea is that we make the circle bigger by including people as we get to know them in our professional life, that can that understand the issues around transfrontier conservation areas, that want to foster the implementation and development of transfrontier conservation areas, and they have something to bring to the table in terms of knowledge or time or just advisory to the processes that are being done. Now, in terms of the membership, of course, as you all understand, I mean, we're all members of 1 or 2 groups in our professional individual capacities. What do you receive back? There always has to be this quid pro quo kind of situation. And in our case, because it's a very loose membership and we do not ask for payment to become a member of the network, so it's totally free. The participation is totally free. What we get in exchange for being a member is really the access to information through the portal, especially the information that is not shared on the public portal because it's deemed to be of more sensitivity, the attendance to the network meetings, participation in open discussions, and just in general the access to a whole host of resources and people that can facilitate the work that we are trying to do. You know, if you're a consultant in your working project, you have a network of people that you can tap on in terms of asking resources, having questions, bouncing off ideas, and generally stimulate the discussions and the content creation around what is currently happening with TFCAs, where is the region going, and how can we continue improving the situation in going forward. We have never had to call for a revocation of membership, as I know of. And in fact, I think what the process that my colleague Nambo has described to you confirms very much that we all have had an increasing number of network members, and including primarily people that might not always share the same ideas or small aspects of TFCA implementation and management, but they always found a way forward and have always found a sort of common denominator that brings everybody together, and that is the importance of looking at our natural resources as ecosystems and looking at the human component of such ecosystem as being very much part of a complexity that needs to be and can be managed successfully for sustainability. The activities of the networks have been given to you in details already, so I just wanted to just reinforce the fact that the network is called to do primarily two types of interventions. One is support the implementation of the SADC TFCA program. So basically doing that through meetings, either face-to-face or online. I mean, we all like to have face-to-face meetings, but I think this kind of period has showed us that we can work online as well if needs be. And that can create even a stronger bond because we can have them more often than we would normally have the annual or even biannual face-to-face meetings, which are very dependent on funding, especially if you ask people to self-fund to participate. Also, they look at program implementation by acting as a support or validation mechanism for consulting work. So Nambo has spoken to you about the guidelines that have been developed over the years, and the steering committee and members of the network based on expertise level have always been used to sort of create a support network for the consultant to bounce around ideas, to create drafts of the reports being given, and to basically accompany the whole guidelines development process, leading to the validation by the steering committee and then by the technical committee. And then, of course, to help the implementation of the M&E framework, which was developed a couple of years back, and now we are piloting in a couple of TFCAs. And of course, we have to do that remotely. So we had to change a little bit the thinking around how do we train TFCAs in implementing the M&E framework, considering that we would like that to become very much of a cohesive and collaborative exercise between countries and between secretariats or international coordinators and actual national governments. And so we're looking at how we can bring that kind of need for collaborative information and sort of data input into the online world. And then on the other hand is the knowledge sharing. So they commit to, the network members, especially the steering committee members, commit to sharing information on the portal, especially because of the login on the section of the portal, where they share news and updates on the TFCAs, if there are any legal changes, if there are any new management documents, so that the portal can become a bit of a historical repository for the TFCAs in our region. And then they organize field visits or exchange visits, exchange interactions between TFCAs and between countries to learn from each other. And much like we're doing here today, maybe even learn from different regions, what are the aspirations and what are the opportunities, and then moving forward. And finally, share knowledge by participating to international and regional events, as we have done. And not just on aspects of transfrontier conservation, but really trying to promote the idea that for our region, transfrontier conservation responds to so many of the strategic needs of SADC, and particularly when we did the M&E framework, we identified what we call the 3 pillars of transfrontier conservation, which is policy harmonization, international collaboration, sustainable natural resource management, and socioeconomic development. So the idea is that we want to share that, what we've done with SADC TFCA, and we want to share the aspiration outside, by doing so reinforcing also what are our needs at home, meaning in the Southern African region. The network started a few years back, as you have learned today. So we've had, well, coming close to 7 years, pretty much, of learning lessons on how to work together and how to establish a network, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and what did make sense when we started and maybe needs to be updated and upgraded as we learn more about each other and provide a new direction for going forward. So in terms of organizations, what we learned is that it really helps from the beginning to not have very sort of vague commitments to doing general support activities to the network, but to really try and assign roles and responsibilities. And, you know, it helped us to have, for instance, the mimicking of the SADC leadership system in our TFCA network system and steering committee system to make sure that there was that drive and that the countries, the member states, would become involved directly into the management of the network, not just becoming the recipient of the SADC Secretariat harmonization and assistance. To also promote co-funding by member states, either in terms of time or in terms of financial resources, to make sure that there is the sort of pot of money that the network can use for its or its own activity, especially in times where you're sort of looking for external funding for specific activities, or, you know, even that the ICPs are in between funding programs and there's not as much to organize your activities around there. And in doing that, you know, looking at the sustainability going forward of promoting online interactions. What we are about to learn now is, by organizing this massive online webinar series that will run for 10 weeks, is whether we can actually take online a lot more than just the steering committee networks, but really take that capacity and that desire to share with other people the stories of SADC TFCAs in an online format instead of relying primarily on a face-to-face interaction. And then the other lesson learned, and I'm just about to be finished, Andrea, is on non-financial resources. It is very important to understand that when you do a network, finances is not always your essential. Your essential is the human capacity and also the understanding that whatever you do has to be sustainable. So look at what is your individual commitments towards the establishment and the running of a network before you look at other solutions, because that is your core and your glue. And then finally, in terms of the membership, we learned that it helps you engage periodically, and that's why possibly the WhatsApp group is way more successful than in terms of interacting between members than the portal. But also involve members and steering committees in rotational management of identified activities. And then from the very beginning, it helps to create and promote a brand that is your brand, and that will never change no matter where your funding comes from or who is going to run it. So it's not dependent on natural cycles of professions and fundings and all the rest of it, but it's there, and it's the way, it's your aspiration is the way you go forward. So with that, I would like to thank you very much again for this opportunity, and just reiterate that TFCAs are a worthy journey, as we have found out in our region, and we hope that you'll find out the same for your region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clara. Again, a really interesting presentation, and I'm particularly interested to hear about all the practical things that the network has been facilitating, really tools that are there for people to use and to propose management opportunities, really practical stuff that's really exciting, things that we can show that are really being delivered with this network. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think we'll quickly move on to our next speaker, number 3, because we are running behind a little bit, so we may have to cut short the question and answer period, which will come next. But for now, we'll move on to Twanda, please. Presentation number 3, how the network helps harmonize regional approaches. Thank you. Over to you.
So maybe I'll just quickly go through, an outline of my presentation. I'll look at the rationale, the policy framework, some of the challenges, the role of the TFCA network. I'll put some more emphasis into that. What are the current priorities? And then I'll end up with the importance or contribution of TFCAs to regional development. So just to begin with, I think the TFCA, or the Transfrontier Conservation Areas approach, is like a paradigm shift in terms of conservation, whereby we are looking at conservation at a much broader landscape, where a number of isolated biodiversity conservation points, hotspots, and islands of conservation are actually being interconnected through the landscape of SADC. I think over the years, I think a lot of these large landscapes have been sort of divided by international boundaries, in some cases isolated by different land uses. So there is need for us to look at a much broader landscape so that we actually bring the huge impact in terms of conservation. But of importance, I think, is it is very crucial that there is cooperative management of these resources, particularly bringing together different stakeholders, as you might have appreciated, and also across the boundaries, which means different member states coming together to manage communal resources or transboundary resources. And then finally, I think because of the recent challenges with regards to conservation, whereby we see a lot of an increase in the wildlife, commercial wildlife crime, that has got a huge impact on biodiversity in the region as such. The human element becomes very critical, such that whatever conservation measures we are taking right now may not achieve much without involving communities in terms of getting them directly involved and participate actively in conservation. So as such, for the new approach of paradigm shift in conservation, despite our aim to achieve biodiversity conservation, development becomes very key. And with development, we're looking into how do we improve the livelihoods, the local economies around these conservation areas becomes very critical. I'll just quickly go through some of the challenges I think that my colleague Nambo alluded to with regards to why we really formed this network and why are we really coming up with this TFCA program. Maybe going back to the presentation, the remarks by my director, that the SADC region actually came up with a lot of ambitious protocols and policies with regards to all these attempts to try and develop the area to actually move our people from poverty with so many programs and interventions. But we see that there's quite a number of challenges with a lot of these ambitious programs, that there's quite a bit of time that is needed for them to be domesticated by the different member states. Of the 17 member states, you find that the SADC program itself is active maybe in about 2/3 at this stage. And we see that because TFCAs are actually multi-land use local development initiatives, we still are faced with quite a number of conflicts, land use conflicts, and in some cases, human-wildlife conflict. But of late, like I indicated, there's a huge challenge with regards to wildlife crime, illegal harvesting at large commercial levels, covering most of the biodiversity, timber, mobile resources, iconic wildlife species, and so forth. But the climate change itself becomes a huge challenge, and it's something that has been affecting the whole globe, and SADC is not spared. And this climate change has got a lot of implications with regard to the management of TFCAs because of disasters, because of such as droughts, pest infestations, and so forth. But it is also important that because we talk of the different sectors that are involved in TFCAs, there is a huge challenge with regards to coordinating and collaborating the different sectors that are involved in the TFCA implementation, but also think about cross-border collaboration between the different countries and different sectors. So as such, it becomes a big challenge. And from experience right now, we see that there is still very weak administrative setups with regards to implementation of the TFCA program. That has got a bearing on the capacities of the different member states in terms of implementing the TFCA program, such that with some countries, they are fully fledged TFCA units, whereas in some countries, there is virtually no structures at all. So this becomes a big challenge in terms of implementation. There's also a challenge of lack of resources to fund some of the projects related to TFCAs, and this is a very widespread observation that we've made throughout the region. There is a challenge to do with awareness and incentives for conservation, especially now with this Transfrontier conservation approach, that the awareness is quite low and is something that might really have a bearing in terms of successes. Coordination in terms of the TFCA projects and also some of the development initiatives, as well as the structures around the various TFCAs is also one area that we think is very important and needs to be addressed as well. Political commitment was demonstrated at the onset of the TFCAs. I think you would appreciate from the presentation by my other colleagues that we enjoy the highest level of political support at presidential level, but we strongly think that we need to reaffirm this political commitment at that level with time. And now it's 20 years down the line. We also want to see a demonstration of that commitment. Although certain countries, some of the countries within the region continue to demonstrate that commitment, but we think we need to assist other countries also to maintain a very high level of political commitment so that we also enjoy the kind of support that we need. I will just quickly go through some of the milestones, or I would say some of the tangible results. I think my colleagues talked about the treaties, the various MOUs that are there. In some cases, like Kaza, the Greater Limpopo, the Lubombo, Malawi, Zambia, there are active projects on the ground with actual structures and secretariats on the ground, and meetings are taking place, and there is actually active enforcement and implementation of the program. But we also want to appreciate the support that we get from some of these international cooperating partners that have come on board, because they also appreciate the way we are organized to implement the program. And in particular, the German Development Corporation, the support from the United States government and the European Union. But this has also resulted in quite a huge contribution with regards to potential expansion of the TFCA program, with some cases like Kaza, Angola, for instance, setting aside more land for conservation, biodiversity conservation, which is quite an achievement. With the establishment of the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier conservation areas, there's been a massive reintroduction of animals in the Limpopo National Park on the Mozambique side, and it's quite a plus on that. And in terms of law enforcement, which is a huge challenge at the moment in the region, we have seen a number of coming together to conduct joint and coordinated law enforcement, cross-border law enforcement. Example is between Zambia and Malawi. There is also a coalition of 4 countries, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Malawi, actually coming together to form a forum that deals with particularly on law enforcement across the borders. But we've also seen more involvement of community participation, especially across the TFCAs, particularly in the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier conservation areas, where these communities are actually getting engaged and participate in the activities of the TFCA program, and in terms of benefiting, in terms of planning and so forth. We've also seen with the coming in of the TFCAs that certain areas where we try to pilot access of tourists to various facilities through a Univisa system, and that we have piloted in Kaza, and it's likely to be rolled out to other member states. Initially it was Zambia and Zimbabwe, but we expect other member states like Botswana and Namibia to come on board. We have also seen development of cross-border tourism products. I think my colleagues talked about them, and we'll talk a bit more about them. And then the establishment of the TFCA itself, to us, is a major milestone, because with the approval of the TFCA program in 2013, also came with this establishment of the network. And this, we believe, is a very strong support in terms of the implementation of the program, as my director has actually indicated. And we've seen an improved marketing or awareness of the TFCAs, especially as tourism destinations, through the Boundless Southern Africa brand, which is now mandated to actually manage under the TFCA, under the SADC tourism program that was recently approved in 2019. Boundless Southern Africa has been given the task to market all TFCAs as special tourism products in the region. This is just a demonstration of some of the milestones, like from our top Left hand is the two presidents of the then president of South Africa and Botswana at the establishment of the first Transfrontier conservation area, the Kgalagadi, which was alluded to by my colleagues. And in the middle of that is it's one of the cross-border, popular cross-border events, which is some cycling event between Namibia and South Africa. At the bottom, in the middle bottom there, on our left side, written Kaza there, is the German ambassador and the Minister of Natural Resources, Environment and Tourism in Botswana, representing 5 partner countries, signing an agreement for Kaza phase 4, which is equivalent to 15 million euros. And it's a demonstration of some of the achievements in terms of the collaboration. And below that, you can see some community members there trying to make their contribution towards the development of what we call integrated development plans for all these TFCAs. And I think, as you might appreciate later on in some of the presentations, we'll talk about the whole sequence of the development of TFCAs. The planning element becomes very critical. And I think if we include our communities from the planning element, the planning stage, it becomes very, very successful in terms of their participation, in terms of their cooperation. Other pictures also talk about the translocation that I talked about, and then the Victoria Falls there, an indication of the Univisa piloting that was done in Gaza, and right in the heart of it are the communities. And I want to draw attention to some of the work that has been done in Greater Mapumbwe Transfrontier Conservation Area that actually looks at children in the wilderness, trying to do an awareness program that is targeting the school-going age, the primary school-going kids, and so that they appreciate what these TFCAs can bring to the communities and can support education and development of the youth. I will just quickly go through the role of the TFCAs, and at this level, we're looking at sort of a strategic role of TFCAs, as it were, looking at the regional level. And we realize that the TFCAs network actually brings in the technical level in terms of development of certain guidelines that we use mostly as benchmarks and standards to guide all the TFCAs in terms of how they implement the program itself, and especially for those ones that are coming in from the different categories that my colleague Nambo actually indicated. And these guidelines are quite handy, and they are open to anybody who wants to use them. And we believe they are a very, very important tool, learning tools, implementation tools, and so forth that would assist with the implementation of the program. But of importance, because we realize that tourism is a major contributor to the GDP of SADC regions. We realize that the network itself brings in a lot of support in terms of the implementation of the SADC tourism development program, and in particular advocating for the TFCAs as preferred destinations for the tourists. But I think above all, the network itself has been providing a lot of support to the SADC structures in terms of decision support, in terms of advice, and some of the main entry of the network itself is the Technical Committee on Wildlife. That is part of the sectoral committee that deals with issues to do with the TFCA program implementation. And we have seen a lot of submissions and advice and guidance from the TFCA network itself with regards to the deliberations in the Technical Committee on Wildlife. We have also seen a lot of information exchange either within the network itself and even outside the network because of the various platforms such as the portal itself. So they also run a newsletter and also interact in different forums, and that presents an opportunity to exchange information and disseminate information. But we've also seen the development of tools for standardized data collection And we do have a framework on monitoring and evaluation. And our plan is to have this framework as part of the SADC results-based monitoring and evaluation system. And at the moment, we are piloting that framework with a lot of input from the network itself. And we owe success of this framework actually coming from the network itself. But we also see the role of the network in terms of resource mobilization. And one of the areas that was indicated by both my director and my previous presenters was the financing facility of SADC, to which the network itself actually played a crucial role in terms of technical support, also in terms of advice, also in terms of the general outlook of this facility. But of importance, I think the role of the network is also trying to forge these strategic partnerships that involve community, private sector, as well as the different governments which are representing the public. And also to demonstrate that TFCAs can actually facilitate development of viable business ventures within the geographical areas where they are operating. So just quickly go through some of the priorities that we're looking at. We are looking at sustainability of the TFCA program in general, but also sustainability of the network. As you might be appreciating, the network has been working very closely and hosted by the German Development Corporation, and one of the projects is coming to an end at the end of this year. And you want to see that network actually, service from the network actually continuing even after that German cooperation project. And as such, we are working on sustainability of the network. And we believe the network will also continue to support the implementation of the TFCA program. And we have seen a lot of contribution of the TFCAs in terms of development, in terms of biodiversity economy, but also TFCAs as tourism destinations, as I indicated. And we believe that they are very strong products for economic development in certain development nodes within the region. And we want to see more participation of other member states. My director alluded to the fact that a lot of these TFCAs at the moment are very active in terms of the terrestrial part of the SADC member states landscape, but we also want to try and move to see more participation of the island member states and also the coastal and marine ecosystems being part of the active TFCAs program. As you might appreciate, most of them remain in category C, and you want to move and see whether they can be actively involved to become category A. We also see the importance of resource mobilization. As I have indicated, resources are a major challenge in terms of implementing the program going forward. It's important that we continue with the resource mobilization. The TFCA financing facility is just one of them, but we see that different participating organizations, especially community-based organizations, and our international cooperating partners have got several initiatives that we are pursuing to try and make sure that we mobilize as much as possible to get the support in terms of implementation of the TFCA program, but also to try and influence decision-making within the member states so that they allocate more resources from their own fiscus towards TFCA implementation in their areas. But we also realize that TFCA being a new conservation approach requires a lot of capacity building, specialized training, and we are working with our centers of excellence in training in wildlife conservation. Example is Mweka in Tanzania, as well as Southern Africa Wildlife Colleagues in South Africa, to develop some of the curriculum that is specifically addressing the issues to do with capacity in TFCA development. I would just want to end and round up and indicate some of the current work that the network is actually working on, because one of the main challenges is a sector in SADC is that the big question that comes from the member states is that what value, what contribution is coming from the TFCA. So it's important that despite talking about this, the qualitative contributions that we have been saying all along, the network itself is attempting to come up with the quantitative numbers and figures in terms of the value, in terms of the actual, quantities, contribution. So I'm just winding up now, and we look at enhancing this connectivity. We look at effectiveness of management of all protected areas through collaboration between the different countries, and we look at these ecosystem services that the TFCs actually bring in. They need to be quantified, and people really appreciate that there are so many services that we get out of the TFCAs. And we look at investment opportunities, it's one of them. And then community livelihoods are very key, because we said communities are very important. And we look at targeted and focused biodiversity conservation programs within the TFCAs. But of importance is also to look at how do we support the implementation of the multilateral environmental agreements such as CITES, and TFCAs are very key in terms of rural development and their nodes. But finally, I think it's important that TFCA should be seen as some of the laboratories for regional integration and collaboration between the member states. Thank you very much for your attention. Asante sana.
Thank you so much for that really interesting talk. I'm particularly interested where you touched on having a regional approach and regional thinking and working with member states to really bring this back up onto the agenda for that regional harmonization. That also ties in very nicely with the lively conversation that we've been having on the chat box. In the order to stay a little bit more on time, I'm going to move past the question and answer and straight on to the next presentation. But at the end, we'll circle back and visit those comments that are being made on the chat, because there's really lively conversation there that we would like to capture. In the meantime, I would like to invite Lisa to give us presentation number 4, what works and what doesn't work to keep an active network. Thank you very much for your presentation, Tranda.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. Try to share the screen.
Right, we can hear you, but we can't see your presentation yet. There it goes.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, colleagues, or good afternoon now, I think, in East Africa. My name is Lisa Blenken. I'm GSS technical advisor to SADC on the Transfrontier Conservation Area Network. And as already alluded, the GSS program is a joint program with SADC on Transfrontier Conservation Areas, where we have established the network and working closely with SADC on also the Secretariat function. So I would like to actually jump into a bit more into what works and what does not work for keeping an active and effective network, which for us was also a bit of a self-reflection exercise, I think. And I hope you can learn from some of our, from the lessons that we have made. Before establishing a network, the recommendation that we can make is to really see and define what the scope of your network will be. You've of course heard a lot of our scope, which was also left a lot on the knowledge sharing and information platforms. Although through the years, the network has multiple purposes basically that they defined. But our recommendation is to really say, okay, what do you want to achieve? Is it mainly for increased coordination of formal processes? Do you want to collaborate across stakeholder groups, or is it mainly government oriented? Is the purpose to share lessons across countries and TFCAs of the East African community? Do you also want to have some kind of a knowledge management and resource repository system? And how would you like that to have looked? Would you also like to address like harnessing and use of expert knowledge on TFCA's issues, and sort of what are your priorities on that? I think that's very important to define and think of when you establish a network. Then other considerations as well is, well, the purpose that I've just talked about, Also the scope of the network membership, and also maybe the priorities of your network membership. Is it mainly more on the NGO donor related? Do you want to actually engage more with communities? I think those kind of questions you would have to ask yourself when you're establishing a network. And then your main ones, like I already said, is actually what are your available resources? So do you have your own resources? Would it be member states partly funded? And are there donors that are online? If there are donors interested, which was the case for the SADC network, I think it's important to already think about the long-term sustainability and longevity of some of your interventions at the beginning. And also, what is the human capacity? So in our case, the network is, of course, the Secretariat is with the SADC Secretariat, but they're very much also supported by our program on that. So some of the building blocks of the network, so some of them are reflected in also the different functions. As already said, the support to the SADC process is like one of the really important building blocks, and the Network Steering Committee is a very important mechanism there. So I think for us also a strong recommendation to have that, but I think your working group is something similar as a steering committee, which for us helps for submitting recommendations to technical committee or ministerial meetings and vice versa. And also, yeah, if there's anything coming out of the network meetings or network exchange, the steering committee will basically facilitate that exchange between the TFCA stakeholders and the SADC formal structures. And we touched on the guideline and policy document development. Knowledge management and communication. So we have various communication platforms, and I will elaborate more on that. But we have a website through which you can then become a member and access a closed member-only platform, which was the initial platform that we've established. We have a network WhatsApp group, and also the steering committee has its own WhatsApp group, which really helps in sort of coordinating the more formal communication, but also sort of allude that a network meeting will take place and that invitations will come soon. That really helps to get the formal face-to-face meetings. Very important for establishing good relationships between various stakeholders, and for countries and TFCA to meet. It's always good to meet people and pick up the phone and ask for advice. These face-to-face meetings are often supported by various donors. So it's a multi-donor effort, but then I'll allude to that later. The coordination is very important. Just very quickly to go back, the TFCA portal where I just talked about and the website, GIZ has supported the establishment, but currently in our sustainability process, IUCN through the Regional Center for Mapping and Resource for Development have taken over the hosting of that, so there's a sustainable solution. And then we have the expert groups, the communities of practice, which are really helpful for addressing specific topics within the network. And as you can already see, the center of this all is the network coordination.
Just so that you know, your presentation has dropped off and we're just seeing video, whatever you prefer.
Okay. Try again. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so but the central role, I think, or the central function of the network that is really important to have is the network secretariat and the coordination. So the SADC TFCA unit is supported through GIZ, and sometimes we also bring in external support, like Clara is one of our coordinators. That is really the binding factor and the glue of all those activities. And especially, I think, when establishing a network, that coordination function is important, because even if you have a network meeting that you want to organize, or if you're working towards establishing a platform, it's that coordinator or that warm body that really helps in moving things forward and keeping people on their toes. Because often it's otherwise like an add-on activity to people's very filled agendas already. So I think that's really something important to note. So I would just like to go through some of the pros and cons of the various functions. Very helpful with support of those SADC processes, or also already said the steering committee, which then also not only has member states represented, but falling out again. Yeah.
I think people are popping in and out, and that's being a bit disruptive, but if you can share again, that would be good. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa, maybe we'll just stop the video and just do the presentation, then it's not going to have any conflicts. Try that, maybe.
I don't have a video.
Try not to show your video, but just the presentation.
Oh, like that. Yeah. The sharing according to SADC structures is very important. Also, what we've seen TFCA. So we've been very lucky that many TFCA focal points have been in their position for quite a while. But for some countries, there has been some shifts, and sometimes it's difficult to get new focal points. So also the role for the Secretariat is very important to sort of ensure that you have focal points and that these are the same people, because otherwise it's difficult to have that institutional knowledge within your steering committee and within your network. The others I talked about, and then yes, your branding is very important. So also a lot of the focal points can avail at the time that they're availing to this network and the steering committee, because their directors or their ministries know that this is a SADC process, and that it also helps us working towards technical committee meetings and ministerial meetings. So I think for the network, it really helps to have that SADC branding. What doesn't work so well, it's the initiative often comes from the coordinator. So even if you have the chairing, the chair is supported by the coordinator and SADC. In former times, we had mainly physical meetings, although now with COVID, we had our first few online meetings. So I think that will actually also help really to coordinate better across countries and just avail like a few hours instead of having the time of really traveling to areas. Of course, traveling also is costly. Chairing is very good, but it can also happen that you have a new focal point that is all of a sudden chairing. But of course, you know, you have 3 chairs or a troika system, so they're always assisted. But you have then, of course, that change every year when somebody else is chairing the network and the steering committee. Sometimes formal processes can also slow down, but it really depends. It's a plus and it's a benefit. Knowledge management and communication. So we have 3 platforms. We have initially there was a request from the steering committee when the network was established way back in 2013 that it should be a closed platform, that not anybody that they don't know should enter and see on it, because there might be confidential. And there was not really a public face to the network. There was basically a members login. So GIZ invested quite a lot of resources in establishing the platform with all its different functions and functionalities. Of course, it is a great platform for having membership and putting documents online. But no one can really find sort of news or information about TFCAs if they're not in the network or not know about it. Secondly, for communication purposes, it's quite difficult to communicate. So I think over the years we've changed, and because of exchange and engagement on a WhatsApp group was established, and that somehow became the more effective tool in communication. So we basically have those three platforms. As I said, portal good for membership tracking, storage of documents, but the initial costs are very high. You have to manage the platform and membership. The uptake is quite weak, and there is low benefits, I think, at that point for the members that are part of the portal, because people don't really prefer logging into something new. The website is a sort of a home where you can also log into the portal, so it's good for visibility and find sort of general information on TFCAs. Websites are normally more not less costly to build, but of course, just a website will not enable you to track membership or and also the management of the platform is time consuming. So currently it's hosted by RMRDC through IUCN via PAMA, but GSS is still helping with the management of it. Then the WhatsApp, so that's a very easy communication platform. Everybody has it on their phone, no additional cost. There is some sort of membership, and every new person added to the group is introduced by its name, function, and title. But there is not a really clear path to membership, which is currently sort of Lee and Clara as coordinators that sort of add people. There's no real storage of documents, and there's no formal structure, but it is used daily and multiple times daily for information exchange across the region. Face-to-face meetings. So for us, the face-to-face meetings work in such a way that both the focal points are invited, so the steering committee as well as other partners as the topics are fitted. The coordinator really works with various partners and the steering committee to see, okay, what can be a current sort of topic of the meeting, and are there also any sort of people that would like to co-fund. So it's a very good platform to build relationships and trust. And to have direct exchange on lessons learned. The steering committee also sort of has meetings before and after. And the coordinator reached out proactively to partners. And as said earlier, it has also thematic discussions during network meetings. And it's also a way to have recommendations table. What doesn't work so well, currently it's on invite only. So we have discussed multiple times, shall we just open it up and send an invitation to all network members? But we haven't done that yet, because I think we also haven't found like a modality to do that. Because currently member states are funded fully, and anybody that's invited, the conference packages is paid for. So of course, to have an open-end invitation, it can be quite unexpected costly, unless you say, okay, people can join, but they have to then pay entirely for their own costs. But so far, every time there was another reason to not do that. So I think it is a very good platform, but then again, not accessible to others, to all. Coordination is very essential to have such a multi-donor, multi-country, multi-stakeholder meeting. And sometimes, the invite process for member states is done through SADC, which is very good to get attendance. But sometimes the process can also be a bit slow to get the actual person that is required for the meeting. Expert groups, the communities of practice. I think it's a very good platform to have sort of to drive thematic issues. But also the steering committee can say, okay, we have this recommendation, but let the committee of practice deal with it. In that membership, it's also very dynamic. So that you have other experts basically in that group with some member state representation. But it's in that it's a very nice mechanism. And the membership is voluntary. What doesn't work so well, the COP needs an active chair, and sometimes a chair is not so active maybe as they originally envisioned, so then it lags behind a bit. Some members, the network members, might not know how to become a COP member, and they miss out on that. One has to manage the priorities of the COP and sort of overlook that. So that's an extra task for the Secretariat with support from the coordinators. And sometimes, yeah, we actually wish to have more member states involvement, but of course their diaries are also busy. So recommendations for the...
Sorry, Lisa, just to check how much time you still need. We're running a bit behind on schedule.
I know this is the last slide. Hello? Okay. Recommendations. So start with looking at your budget and resources when you set up your network. Think about really engaging a good and dynamic coordinator and see who's your human capacity to build a group. And then we know that other networks actually use a platform which is an open platform that's already there, so you wouldn't have to build it. It's e-groups, which might be nice to consider because you would have a way to track your membership, but wouldn't have to build something from scratch, and you would still have some sort of your information and resource repository. Yeah, and then finally, just look at your purpose. Do you want to do more formal structures or knowledge management? If you want formal structures, you might not even need all those tools. And then, of course, join us during our webinar series, starting on the 7th of July. I will send invitations via Andrea. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Lisa. Thanks for a really, really in-depth presentation. I think it couldn't be more timely, this presentation, given that, you know, EAC is just in the process of establishing this working group. So I think a lot of these reflections are of immense value to the EAC as we reflect on how to emulate some of these best practices. So I won't go into. I know there's been a really rich discussion in the chat, and we really hope we can read that briefly at the end. But we are really far behind, and so I would really like to move then to the following and last presentation from Steve Collins from the USAID Resilient Waters Program. Steve, I hope you're there and are able to give your presentation now.
Yes, good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, I suppose, in East Africa. Can you see me and hear me?
Loud and clear, Steve.
Okay, great. The power to our neighborhood just went off, so but my battery should last for the presentation. It will be a short one, I think, because a lot has been covered. But maybe just to say from our side as USAID, a network like this is incredibly powerful and incredibly useful within the SADC arrangement. We're a program that works on transboundary water management as well as transboundary conservation areas with a focus on CASA and the Greater Limpopo TFCAs. And it's been an incredible avenue for us to be able to interact with all the different levels within different countries. So as much as Nambo mentioned that a lot of the communities might not make up a big proportion of the participants, the NGOs are there, government departments are there, and for us to interact with the network makes things a lot easier for us. We've got a new program, we're able to communicate very effectively. In terms of, I've been part of setting up various networks over my time working in Southern Africa, and from peace and election observer networks to this one, which has got a very different focus. And I think at the end of the day, what keeps a network working is its usefulness to the members. This has got a very active WhatsApp group. Some people are more quiet than others, some people are more vocal, but the bottom line is I don't see people leaving the network. I see it growing. And to me, that's a sign that it is useful. The discussions that happen there, I just used it literally last week to make contact with one of our Angolan stakeholders. I found his details on the network, and I reached out and we had a meeting. So that means it's useful for me. We would remain part of the network as a result. I think what's also very important is the vision of these transfrontier conservation areas is a long-term and a big vision. It's a vision which moves beyond the boundaries of the countries by their very nature. And I think I was thinking about if this 20 years ago, it would have been very difficult to hold a meeting like this. There were no cell phones in many parts of Africa. It was really difficult to even find the phone numbers and the contacts of people across the border that you might want to interact with. That's what the network is doing. It is enabling people to communicate around common issues and common problems that people are facing. We know the natural systems are not the same as the country borders. We have inherited colonial borders that were set up in Europe 100 years ago, and we need to work beyond that because the natural system certainly works beyond that. If you just think about watershed management and the links between the water that rises in Angola and flows into Botswana, the Okavango Delta, and the whole Xhosa system, if you have a look at that, it outlines in many ways the water for the Okavango and the Zambezi. And that means countries downstream have an interest in speaking to countries upstream. That's what this network has been used for. It's been used for some very productive discussions across borders, and it facilitates it very easily. The last thing I want to say is we as international cooperating partners have been under quite a lot of pressure to find funding to ensure the long-term viability of the SADC TFCA network. And I think what's happened with the COVID crisis, the locking down of borders, is that we have found a way to communicate via these platforms, which means that the cost of running a network like this is so much less than it was envisaged a year ago. I think we were so stuck in the old way of we need to build trust and we need to meet face to face. It's hard to just around a specific area, for example, the community engagement area. But now these platforms make it cheap and easy. I think we should be spending the next while training each other on how to use these platforms effectively. The WhatsApp group, as you saw, is very effective, I think, for sharing information. It's not that great for having big, large discussions, but there are other platforms that we should be using. So I'm hopeful going forward that we will keep using the network. I think it will grow. I think it will, by its very nature, over time, things will change. There's times when the poaching discussions and the wildlife crime are high on the agenda. The other times will be water and droughts and maybe livelihoods. I think now it's been what to do around tourism and COVID. And I think we need to bear in mind, not just Southern Africa, but in East Africa, a lot of our recovery from this COVID crisis, there's going to be pressure on these protected areas. There's going to be pressure on the tourism industry. And I think the more we speak together, the more we interact, the easier it will be to recover, because that's where resilience starts. Resilience starts on having a family, a home, a community of practice you can talk to, you can interact with. And that's what the network's been providing to these practitioners who believe in the importance of biodiversity, who believe in the importance of community livelihoods and the sustainable development across these landscapes. And because of that, they use the network. So I will leave it there to allow more time for discussion. My colleagues, who I've got to know very well over the last number of years, have covered, I think, some of the most important areas in terms of what it does, practically how it works. But for me, the whole thing is it's useful and people will continue to use it. Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you so much for a really, really brief, concise, clear presentation. It was really beneficial to hear from you sort of practical experiences with the network. And also, again, you know, I think it was great to highlight the importance of that connectivity and vision for transfrontier conservation areas, and really how, you know, kind of an ecosystem approach is so absolutely critical to the challenges we're facing. And also just to mention that the pandemic situation that this region and the whole world is going to try to recover from. And so having this kind of a network and these connected landscapes and systems sustained is going to be such a vital part of the strategy. So thank you very much, Steve, for that discussion. We are very late on the agenda, and I really appreciate people have stayed on this webinar. So I don't think we're going to have a lot of time for questions right now, unfortunately, but I would just like to point out that I think many of you probably have been following the chat discussion that has been really rich and interesting. And I think one of the things that came out very strongly is, as has been pointed out, that of course East African Community and SADC are not somehow isolated, separate regions in the sense that they have common borders, but they also have even common members already that are members of both economic blocs. There is very good reason to be considering much closer integration and closer working relationships, and encouraging platforms such as this for sharing examples. It can even be a way of maybe reconciling, looking at some of the different opinions that exist across these blocks, really speaking with one voice as Eastern and Southern Africa on some of these common challenges as well, approaching partners for strategic initiatives and funding. Even there's many reasons to really kind of encourage this kind of learning. So I think it's very encouraging to see these sorts of comments coming out already from this first webinar, and it just gives me a lot of confidence and hope that this is a really worthwhile initiative. And I think the timing is so good now, with the EAC having just constituted this working group. And I really appreciate the very rich insights and experience that has come from many years from many of you so closely working with this this network. So yeah, I think I'm not going to go through all the questions now and all the discussions in the chat. As we mentioned, the idea is that this is an introductory first kind of event that we are having between SADC and EAC, but that we would have more ability to share these lessons and actually build on some of these very good points that are coming up in the chat. So I believe that the Director of Productive Sector EAC has had to leave the call. But perhaps we should move now towards the closure. But I don't know if we could maybe finish this by first of all giving the word back to the two regional economic blocs. So I don't know if Simon, you would like to speak on behalf of EAC, and then maybe to say a few words, and then maybe if SADC on behalf of the director or the SADC Secretariat would like to say a few concluding remarks and words. So maybe Simon, then I will first hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leo. For this opportunity again to speak on behalf of the director. But first, I would like to thank all the participants for attending the webinar. It was quite a good number. We thank CMS, IUCN for facilitating the webinar. And actually, since we emphasize collaboration among our partners, this is a good example of the way we need to move forward. We also thank all the presenters for sharing the very useful insights and quite inspiring. I think it's more than we bargained for. We have learned a lot, and some of the lessons that we have picked on my side include the need to categorize the TFCAs because they are at different stages, so that we see what to prioritize. The issue of data management and data sharing and knowledge management came out very strongly. We need to develop protocols on sharing data, and also the need of building trust and relationships. I picked that one as a strong idea that we need to implement on our side. And also having a wide network than what is in our minds that encompasses wide-ranging expertise and comprising different stakeholders, and also need to leverage digital technology. So those are some of the things that we picked. Another interesting idea that came through is formation of a community of practice for different thematic areas, like the one on tourism products, because for us, we have a challenge of developing cross-border tourism products. Another thematic areas is like data management, monitoring and evaluation. Also guidelines, that's a thing that actually are captured in our regional strategy to combat poaching. And another thing that was mentioned is collaboration, especially when it comes to marine ecosystem, especially given the growing significance of blue economy. That's an area we should explore between SADC and EAC, and also we can extend that to IGAD, and within the EU project, that's something that should be considered. We also agree with the observation by Steve Collins towards the end that we have been following the administrative borders in looking at our ecosystem, and this negates effective functioning of those transboundary ecosystems, and we therefore need to pursue coordination and creation of synergies as much as possible. And I believe the African Continental Free Trade Area arrangement and the AU provides an impetus for us to pursue these cross-regional collaborations. In a nutshell, we have taken note of all the lessons, and we are going to table these to our relevant technical working group under wildlife and also environment, and also the sectoral councils under the two areas, and we see what we can adopt or adapt. And because we believe, or we have observed, the characteristics of our transboundary areas are quite similar. According to what I was informed by Adria, the proceedings have been recorded, and therefore we'll be able to share with the entire technical working group and also partner state experts, both in tourism, wildlife, and environment. And again, to go back to what I started with, we look forward to more engagement, more sharing through the webinar series, and eventually an exchange of technical visits where we can see things practically. And in this regard, we'd like to invite the SADC representative, especially for the TFCA network, to visit EAC headquarters for further engagement once the pandemic eases. With those, I will say, once again, say thank you to everyone. And perhaps I recommend if we can have Telesfor say a word, and then we give back to Andrea. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, thank you so much, Leo. My name is Deborah Kahatano. I'm Senior Officer responsible for Natural Resources and Wildlife at SADC Secretariat. I just want to say a few words on behalf of my director, who is now busy with other meetings. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this very useful webinar. It has accorded us an opportunity as SADC, as the region, to share our experiences in transfrontier conservation. We have been dealing with these issues for the past 20 years, as indicated earlier on. And I believe we have a lot of lessons. We have failed in some cases, we succeeded in others. So this is an opportunity for us to share experiences with our brothers and sisters in East Africa, so that as you engage in this journey, you don't have to go through the same pitfalls that we went through. You can already start on a higher level ground by learning from what we've experienced in terms of implementing the SADC TFCA program. So I'm really grateful to the CMS and UNEP, IUCN, the USAID, European Union, and GIZ for the support. And of course, not forgetting our sister rep, the East African community, for trusting us that we have something that we have learned that we can share with you that can help you to improve on your programs and the new programs that you are coordinating at the moment. So we thank you so much for that opportunity. I truly believe that this engagement that we started today is not going to be a once-off event. I hope we'll have an opportunity to continue to engage and share many lessons. We welcome the invitation to come and visit the offices in Arusha. So once we go out of the COVID-19 phase, I'm sure we'll make an arrangement for representatives of the network to visit the East African community offices in Arusha, just to share experiences and continue engaging. But I think we need to continue engaging and identify avenues where we can have continuous engagement and maybe in future formalize our arrangements. I've seen in the chat somebody was asking what stops us from creating a single unified SADC and East African Community TFCA network. Those are the things that need to be discussed. We don't have an answer now, but I think we should leave the platform open. We can continue to engage and we see what this journey will take us, the one that we started today. So with those few remarks, I thank you so much for opportunity. We are happy that you've given this opportunity to share experiences, and I hope you found this information useful and that will guide you as you continue to strengthen your transboundary collaboration working group. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And just before I hand over to Andrea for the last word, thank you very much on behalf of IUCN for this very rich discussion. I would agree with Simon that really it even exceeded our expectations, and a lot of really valuable lessons were shared. So this is a really good starting point. And thank you also for our supporters, the European Union BioPharma program, also the USAID program that supports the Natural Capital program in East African Community. And I think if we work together as a collaborative group going forward, I think there is some really good building blocks for successful transboundary natural resource management in the making here. So I won't speak any further, but I will then hand over to Andrea for the last word. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo. I'll be very brief. I know we're already pushing into extra time. I would just like to say thank you so much to all of our wonderful presenters and the directors that made their time to come and join this webinar. I really think it was the start of something. These presentations were really inspiring. Thank you to those who made wrap-up comments that were, also encouraging us to go forward with this. I think it's the start of something, and we look forward to working with you on this in the coming months to continue to promote this cross-regional interaction and this cross-regional learning. Finally, I'd also like to make a quick but very heartfelt thank you to Nora for being the host computer, Nora from our CMS office in Bonn. And thank you to our supporters, the European Union, and everyone who participated today. So with those words, thank you and good afternoon, everyone.